right, so we're going to go through the process of doing a planar track again, this time with actual footage. Let me close my other windows because I have too many of these windows open right now. Camtasia can close.
And will this video have sound?
This one will have sound. Yep, I did not realize it did not have sound. So I will actually make sure that it has sound.
Okay.
I checked it, it was there. It was live. Cool. So I shot some stuff with the GoPro today. Just stuff out in the hallway. Just simple scenes. So a lot of the footage that I'm going to give you, feel free to use this. If you want to shoot your own footage, feel free to shoot your own footage too. As long as you're able to do the same thing, I'm fine with that. Okay. So there's several different shots you can kind of pick from. Some are going to be better than others. And then other ones you have obviously more of an ability to add stuff into the mix. Yes, sir.
And then access these even though the servers are down?
Nope, just on that station. You have to get these from Canvas. Remember that folder I provided that said all your footage is going to be in here?
Okay.
That's where all the footage is going to be. Okay? So obviously a couple different shots you can choose from. This one is for color matching. So you can see right at the beginning of this, you can see that's the pure white. This is the pure black. This was something I printed off. So I have to find, I have one. I don't know what I did with it. I thought it was here. But I printed this one off. It's not perfect colors, but it's good enough for what we're doing in here. Once I find my good one, then we'll use the good one. Okay. Cool. So first step in everything that we do is we go in through After Effects. We have to export the footage out and bring that into Nuke. So all I did was literally just import the footage. So same thing for Premiere, After Effects, whatever it is. Import the footage. Yes, it's already there. I drag this to the new composition. And then I go to File, Export, Add to Render Queue. Let me delete these other ones so we don't get confused. There we go. Under Lossless, we have to choose a sequence. So TIFF sequence. And then don't need anything for format options. Everything is pretty straightforward there. And then under Output 2, the way that I output them is now that we're getting more files, and you can see how intense Nuke can get, we need to start organizing our stuff better, okay? So when we did our still match, we basically just had some source files and some random stuff. Now that we're doing the planar tracking, we need to start organizing these things right away. So I have my original media, which is all of my videos. I have my from After Effects sequences, and then I exported all of them. So each one is in their own folder, and each one is named appropriately for the sequence. So this is the lobby. This one is the fonts, things that are outside. This one is the alignment ones I got. And that one's the hallway. I don't have it in the classroom. I thought I had that. Well, whatever. All right, so I'm going to call this what I want to call it. So this one is the hallway or vestibule or whatever you want to call it. Or not the hallway. Lobby, whatever you want to call it. Okay? So it has to be name, dot, bracket, pound signs, end bracket, dot, tiff. Okay, and just so you can see that on a bigger screen, not that. That's why I have so many windows open, because they just autopilot. So when you name your stuff, that's what it has to be named. Not the name specific, which is the formatting. You need the bracket, the pound signs, and the bracket so that After Effects knows to output a sequence. And I think we looked at Premiere last time, and Premiere was similar but not the same. Okay, so you can reference that again. And then the dot .tiff. Okay, so that's how it's going to output the stuff. You can tell it to save it into a subfolder if you're going to be outputting several different sequences. That helps, especially if you see how many files are inside here. Remember, there's one per frame. So these are one per frame there, and then if I were to output a second one, that's another one per frame, and here's another one that's one per frame. So your folders can get very intense, very heavy, very quickly. One thing on the GoPro to pay attention to, let me just hit save here. There you go. Oops. Yes, that's good. I'm going to hit render. And I'll just have to, actually I'm going to stop. I don't need another sequence of this. But on the GoPro, if you look at the timestamp for this, my timestamp is actually starting at 4 hours, 41 minutes, 16 seconds, and 27 frames. So that's where it's starting at. We talked about this a little bit before, about how sometimes Nuke will offset our timestamp into some crazy values. This is one of those times where our footage is doing that for us. So when I come into Nuke and I read my footage file, look at my numbers here, 515,250. So I'm fine working like that. I have no issue working like that. It's typically easier, especially if you have a huge sequence, to do that kind of stuff, but just be aware that it's there. If you don't want it there, then you can reset your After Effects comp settings so that the start time is 0. And now when I export this out, my start frame will be 0, and then it'll go from there. Premiere, I don't think it would do that. It may not do that in Premiere because you're making your own comp. I'm sure there's a way to do it. We can look at it if we need to. So I exported out a sequence from After Effects for every single one of these that I'm going to use. You export out whichever one you want to use. You don't have to do all of them. You can just do one of these. That's it. Okay? So now I have, let me delete that one, a folder for each one of these that I'm going to use inside there. Cool. So I go to Nuke. My first step is to hit the S key right here and set up my project directory. Remember that we want to set that up every time we come in. That way Nuke knows what project we're working on. So I made a project folder called Sarcona Planar Tracking. That's the one I told it that I'm working on. So make sure you have that. I also went under my full-size format and chose HD 720. That's the kind of footage that I brought in from After Effects, so I want to make sure that that matches. I also set my frames per second to 30. Okay? So set your project directory, set your frames per second, and set your full-size format. That way Nuke knows exactly where your stuff is and how big it's supposed to be. It'll save you some headaches down the road. All right, so now I have this image I showed you before, which is the color swatches that we can use. These are good because if there is, let's say, more green or blue or orange or whatever color inside of our white, that would definitely come off. So if I click Control, Shift, and click drag right here, that basically does an eyedropper little thing and averages all the pixels in there so that I can see what they are without hovering my mouse over it. So if I look down here, this is my actual value of white, okay? So white, which should be a value of 1, 1, and 1, or some even number, is actually coming up 0.56004, 0.56004, and 0.62578. So what that tells me is that there's more blue in my image than there is red and green. So that if I were to add a picture of a white animal to my scene, I need to make sure that that white animal actually has a little bit more blue than the other two colors so it looks like it's balanced inside the scene. Okay? Eventually we'll get into, once I get my actual card, using these to actually match, like here's the correct color that it should be. Also in my black, you'll see something very similar. Red and green are pretty similar, but then the blue is a little bit higher. So same thing, that blue is just more dominant color, especially for the rooms and the lights that we have in the college. Okay, so stuff to pay attention to when you're trying to match stuff and you just can't get it right. All right, so I have that. And then further down the chain, I have this. So this is just a grid. There. So I just printed a grid from the internet. It's squares, that's all it is. The purpose of it is to be able to see how much distortion there is on that camera, okay? Because when we do something like planar tracking, it's trying to find a flat area and track that flat area. It has a very difficult time doing that when our flat area is actually rounded like this, okay? Now going to the lobby here, if you look at the shot, let's say right there, look at how round that door frame is compared to what it should look like, which is not rounded, right? So I was going to show how to use this inside of Nuke, but something happened when I recorded this. I don't know if there's something on the lens, but it like dipped it there, and this actually didn't work as well as I was expecting it to, and it also dipped it like on this side too. It's like wrinkled. So I'm going to have to figure out why that did that. So we're just going to do it the old-fashioned way, pretending we don't have that thing there. Okay? So we're going to have to do a lens distortion to remove any distortion from it so that we can get it so it's nice and clean. So I hit tab, I go to lens distortion, and I hook it up. Now these, just ignore those for now. But once we have a lens distortion for one camera like the GoPro, I can reuse that lens distortion for any GoPro footage I have that's set at the same settings. If I shot at, this is 720 at wide, so it's giving me more distortion. If I set 720 at narrow or 720 at or narrow or medium, then I would have to do a different one. Or if I shot it at 4K, then I may need a different one also. All right, so for this footage, basically anything I shoot with the GoPro for this class, that's the settings I'm going to use, so I can reuse this distortion node for any of those pieces of footage, okay? So this is how this distortion node works. We have, first we have to do is go to an area where there's a lot of distortion that we can see, like this. Over here, it's very difficult to see. This door frame is not very bent. These are, but they're hard to see because they're in the background. So I'm going to an area where it's pretty obvious where the distortion is not only here, but also on this side, also up here, and also down there. In order for this to work, I have to have 4 lines, 2 going horizontal, 2 going vertical, and I have to basically draw them so that Nuke knows like this is what's supposed to be a straight line, and it's obviously not a straight line, okay? So I'm going to go to this line tool over here. Oops. And I'm going to zoom in and try to find something with some contrast to it. So I think like right here where this edge is, that seems pretty contrasty. So I'm going to click right where the intersection is. I'm going to come down a bit, draw another one, come down a bit, draw another one. If I need to move them, I can just click and drag and move it. And there. Okay, so this is supposed to be a straight line. You can see that's obviously not a straight line. Okay, so that's one. So I'm going to hit enter. And then I'm going to draw another one. So I'm going to go to this side, same thing. Here, there. Hit enter again. And now I'm going to go horizontally. So I'm going to go this way. Now you only need 3 points, but the more points you have, as long as they're all good points, the better the solve is going to be. If I have 2 points, Nuke's just going to ignore it and it's not going to work. Okay? So right now I have 3 lines. There's 1, 2, and 3. This solve button is still grayed out. The second I draw that last line, that solve button should not be grayed out anymore. I initially, when I first did this one, I went up here. That's not a good one to use. I'm going to use this one here. There you go. So the second I started drawing the full line, you'll see the solve popped in. There. And there. Okay. So now I have my 4 lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell Nuke to solve this. Oops, sorry, forgot this. I have to do key all, there we go, then solve. Okay, it did, it's good. I didn't have to hit key all, I don't think. And then I'm going to hit undistort. And so now my footage is undistorted. It's basically taking those 4 lines that are curved and straightening out where they're at with the rest of the footage. So now my GoPro footage looks like any other camera that doesn't have distortion on it. Oops, there we go. Okay, it's nice and clean. Now to show you what that looks like, let me copy this distortion node. Here is, oops, let me change this to input. And I'm going to paste it here. Now that's what that grid looks like now with that undistorted object on there. You can see it still has this like weird crook in there. I don't know what that was. But that's much smoother than it was before. Now anytime we do undistort, we lose part of the footage. Here it was before, here it is after. Okay? So eventually we'll get into undistorting things after the fact, or sorry, undistorting it at the beginning and then redistorting it at the end, so we are left with the same footage. But for now, we'll just leave it like this, okay? So that's good. All right, so now this distort node, come on, right here, this will work for any piece of footage that I shot with this camera at these settings, okay? So if I bring in another piece of footage, that was hallway. Come on. All right, so the hallway is all jacked up. I go and I paste this in there, and now the hallway is no longer distorted and crazy fisheye look to it. Cool, right? So save those lens distortions so you can use them later. So now that I have this done, lens distortion is gone. Now I can just do a planar track and just do the same thing we've been doing before. So I add a roto, just like we did before. Make sure I'm viewing the correct area. And then I want to find something that I'm going to track. So I could track anything that I want, right? So as long as I have a plane that I'm tracking, I can track that item, and then I can replace it with whatever it is that I decide that I want to do. So on here, I'm going to use this piece of paper there as something that I want to remove or get rid of or modify. So I'm going to go to the beginning. I'm going to outline it. And this doesn't have to be perfect right there. You just want to get it, you know, kind of like in the same spot, like that. And then I have to right-click and do planar track. Now, if you don't see planar track, anyone want to guess why we wouldn't see planar track here? Correct. So we are using Nuke X. Nuke X has all the bells and whistles. So if you don't see planar track here, it's because you're under regular Nuke, or the 5,000 other versions of Nuke that get installed when you install regular Nuke, okay? So make sure you're in Nuke X, and then you right-click, and then you can planar track. And then you can say, go ahead and track forward, and then it'll track forward. Now, because our footage is nice and clean, the distortion's off of it, this track for that specific item actually does track pretty good, or it did, you know, earlier today. Anything that we have inside of a plane can be tracked. So even if it was my palm of my hand and I'm doing this, that's a planar surface that I could track and have Nuke put something like right inside my hand, okay? Because it's flat, that's all it is. It needs contrast, so if you've ever looked at any of the footage online, sometimes you'll see people will put like dots on their hand or on their piece of paper or whatever it is, and that's acceptable also. I could also, if I had, let's pretend that this was glued down to a piece of cardboard or something. I could do this. I could hold this piece of paper up and videotape myself doing this, and Nuke would be able to track this shape, and I would be able to replace that with another item, okay? So anything that is planar, you can replace, which is, again, awesome. All right, so that tracked pretty good. I can see right from the beginning. Oops. It worked perfectly, okay? So now I go back to the beginning again. I turn on these two items, and then I turn on my planar map, my planar preview. Now this is basically, this big orange box is just a way for us to see what is that plane looking like. So if we end up with, this is our background plate and that plane is like this, we know that something may have gone wrong or it just needs to be realigned or whatever it is. Typically, whenever you draw that first box, it's matching that planar or that perspective of that first box. So it's nothing to freak out about until it's like permanently there. So I don't want to replace this piece of paper. What I want to do is I want to put something next to it. So if I just go here, and I'm trying to look at these lines and make sure these lines kind of match with that. And the same thing with the vertical, making sure the vertical lines match the same perspective as that one. All right, so that looks pretty close, maybe not. All right, that's going to be close enough for right now. All right, so once I have that, that's it. So now I can check it out and make sure that that follows it right where it should. Now because I didn't put it right on top of that piece of paper, that's fine, because that plane is basically the entire board. That's one flat area, and everything's in the same plane of that area, so I can move that wherever I want. So that's what's crazy sweet about this, is that if there was something over here on this side of the board I wanted to track, but it goes off frame and I don't see it, I can track something all the way over here and it's still on that same plane, so it still works out. So you can see it still lines up. It's gorgeous. All right, cool. So now I can actually make it into something. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to say I want a corner pin. There's 3 of them that we can play with. Relative, absolute, or stabilize. Okay? So let's go through each one of these and see what they do. So here's relative. Okay, it says relative. And then here is absolute. Don't connect to that one. And then here is stabilize. Okay, you're not connected. And then we'll also show tracker just so you can see that too. Okay. So now once we have this, our process is pretty much the same thing of what we did under the 2D tracker. We track stuff with the 2D tracker. We created something like a transform node, and then we were able to move it. Let's say tracker. Oh, yeah. So this is a tracker. We could use this to create more corner pins if we wanted to, or transform nodes. So we don't really need that one. Okay, we could use it, but we don't need to. All right. So what is the difference in all 3 of these? So if I take this stabilize and I put it on my original footage, and now I look through this footage and hit play, we get this. Okay, so this is stabilizing our footage. So instead of us taking a piece of artwork and having it move with our geometry, this is actually keeping that area still. We can drop our item on top of it and then tell it to unstabilize and just start moving again. Okay, so you can see how it's like locked into place. So now if I go to the stabilize, that's a corner pin. Yes, stabilize. I believe I have to do like a -1 type thing on it. We're not going to worry about this one now, but that's what I would have to do to get it to then move back the other way. Okay, but that's what stabilize will do. Okay. Now let's go to corner pin. And the way corner pin works is we attach a picture to this. So I'm going to use color bars. It's always a good one to try out. Let me close all these so we can see it. So right now, if we rewind and we hit play, we'll see that the color bars then move along where the footage is at. Now, in order for us to get the footage in here too, we have to merge it. So stabilize is one that basically stabilizes our footage so that it's locked into place. And we put our stuff on top and then we unstabilize it. With the corner pin one, either one of these, we have to then merge it back onto the original one. Let me scoot this over there. I don't know if that's going to be easier or more difficult. We'll find out. I'll pull this down. I really need more screens. That goes there. This goes here. I don't need you, so you stay there. There we go. Okay. So now we rewind, and then we hit play. And then what we can see is there is our color bar sitting right next to that other piece of artwork, or that other piece of paper. And you'll see the perspective matches, it updates as it goes. Like that's a good track. Sweet. Now if I need to update it, something went wrong, it's skewed, whatever it is, always rewind it back to the beginning. All I have to do is then go back to the roto, back to that planar shape, and then I just update it. So just as for instance, I do that. And then that will update along the entire thing. If I update it in the middle, what Nuke is going to do is try to animate from my first frame to this frame. So instead of it just staying in that position, now it's going to try to blend into that position. So way over here, it's still this crazy one, and then it blends into that. So now we've kind of lost the effect of it. To remove that, I can go up here. I guess that didn't work. Scooting everything over because now I can't see anything. Let's go there, I guess. Let's close this one. Close pane. There we go. Over here, these are go to keyframes. So I can say go to the last keyframe. So that's my first one. Go to the next keyframe, and then just subtract that keyframe. And so now it's back to where it was before. Oops, maybe not. Let's go here. Clear tracking data, yes, yes, yes. Go to reference frame. Yeah, that's my reference frame. That's just jacked up now. I don't know what happened to that. All right. That should work where I can just delete it. So it's not letting me delete it, so well. All right. So I'm going to, that's what absolute did. Okay, put it right in the exact spot. And then here's what the relative does. So I'm just going to connect the relative. Let me fix this tracker because I've already tracked something. So I'm going to go to this one. That one. There we go. And make sure I'm viewing it. Cool. So this is what relative does. So relative will take the original size of our document and use that entire document as what it's tracking. So it doesn't actually like shrink it down to the correct size like the other one did. It's just keeping it that same size. So we can take a relative one and make it absolute simply by going into the relative options, going to the From tab and saying Set to Input. And so now basically this is an absolute one. If I go to the absolute, you'll see that the From here looks exactly the same as the From there. Okay? So that's the big difference between those two items. As they do that. Gorgeous. Okay, so now it's tracked, and then I can do some color corrections and whatever else. Okay? Now, let's take this a bit further. So I am going to open up Photoshop while we're waiting for this to do its thing. I want to get rid of this pop can bin. Okay? So the pop can bin is not on a single plane. Right now, it's on two planes. It's on the ground, and it's on the back wall. Those are the two areas. So if I were to track, let's say, just this, that doesn't give me the side of it or the top of it or any of that. So I'm going to track the floor here. I'm going to try to track the floor there. And we'll see if I'm able to do it. I should be able to do that relatively simple. There should be enough contrast in the floor that I could track it and then basically just like erase this area. All right. So let's clean up our mess in here. This is like way too much stuff. I'm going to go crazy if I see this. I don't need this or any of these. I already have my lens distort node. Oh, don't delete the viewer. So delete those. Are you sure? Yes. Get rid of all this stuff. Get rid of all this stuff. That was Photoshop opening, not Nuke crashing. There we go. Get rid of all this stuff. Get rid of that. Okay. So that's where we start. We don't need this. All right, so I'm going to go back to my lens distortion node. I'm going to add a roto after this, and I'm going to try to track that area. Oops. Now I can't be at frame 0 here, or whatever, at the beginning, because it's not in the shot. So I'm going to have to do this like over here, where I'm kind of like in the center of the shot. It's updating. All right, so like right there looks like a good enough amount of time. All right, so I'm going to take this. I'm going to planar track. And then I'm just going to track this forward, and we'll see what happens. So far, so good. All right, that worked. Now let me go back to my keyframe, and I'll track back the other way. And because of how planar tracks work, you'll see that it slides like right off the screen. Okay? If this was a 2D track, it would have just stopped the second one of those tracks hit even the edge of the screen. It would have just freaked out. Okay? So now I have a track just for that area. So then I'm going to go into Photoshop real quick. And I'm going to grab one of those images. So planar track, this is my sequence from After Effects. This is number 4, I believe. Yep. And I want to grab an image that has a close-up shot of the garbage or the can thing. So I think that's as close as I'm going to get to that. It's a bit further away. Yep, that's it. Okay. So I'm going to use that image there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to actually just like clone stamp this out. So I'm going to use my clone stamper. I'm going to use my brushes here and just erase this out of here. Now you'll notice that I screwed up really bad there. Look at that. I'm going to do a different method, which is I'm going to copy an area. I'm going to paste it. Oops. And then I'm going to slide it over. All right, that looks pretty close. Oops, a little bit more on this side. That's pretty close there. All right. So I'm going to use a little levels on this just to kind of bring that ore into where it should be. No. Nope. All right. Levels didn't do me any help, so I'm going to go to my mask and just feather the mask in. So when you're working in anything like Photoshop or Nuke or anything, there's no like freebie or for anything. You just have to really play with the tools until it works. So ignore the blue bin kind of popping through right now. Because I'm going to go back and I'm going to airbrush out or airbrush with white to get that to then go away. All right, so that's better. I'm going to also just merge this in and then now use my clone stamp to fix up some of those areas. I wonder if I can use the healing brush. Where are you at? Oops, that's the wrong healing brush. Spot healing. Yeah, there we go. Ugh. Nope. So that's getting closer. Erased too much there, so I'm going to switch back to my rubber stamp and then just paint this in. All right. This is, I'm trying to clean up a dead body, right? There we go. All right, that'll do. Okay, cool. So now I'm going to save this. Cleaned up bin. Okay. All right, cool. So that gives me the one spot here. So now that this is set up, let me go into my tracking stuff. And this plane is going to be one that I'm going to use along the ground. So I'm going to set this up to be on the ground here, on the ground there. And so you see how I'm like distorting this so that it looks like it's actually part of the ground. Pull that down, pull this back. And I'm trying to get these lines here to line up with the molding that's on the ground there. Come on. That's looking good. All right, that should be close enough, I think. We'll find out. Oh, did it in the wrong frame. So let Nuke think for a second. There it is. Yes, yes, yes. Good tracking data. Corner pane, create link, yes. I don't know why it's not deleting that. It should definitely be removing my stuff there. That's on, yes. Whoa. All right, we're back to where it's, we'll just pretend that that's lined up with the rest of it. I'll fix the other part later. All right. So now that I have this, I'm going to go and make my corner pin. And I'm going to do this as a relative. And I'm going to read in that piece of footage. So 204, cleaned up bin. And then I'm going to just say set to input. And then I'm going to go and add a transform in here. I think that's what I want. And make that bigger. Let's see if this works. Close, close. There we go. All right, cool. So I can rotate it. So now I'm just going to merge this into that. Okay, so now if we look at this before, you'll see how it's kind of moving with it. Oh, that's going back to that shape. Right there should be fine. Nope. There it goes. Okay, go here. Nope, that doesn't want to play nice at all. try this again. So we're going to close all these footage, all these things, go back to this. All right, so I'm going to try tracking the wall first. That might be a little bit easier to get the results I'm after. All right, so I'm at 506.432. I make sure it's a planar track. And then I say track forward. There we go. And then we go back to our 506.432 right there. We track the other way. And then there we go. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this. And go back to that setup. All right, so I'm just going to set this up for the wall and not worry about the other floor part right now. All right, so that's close to the wall. It's actually like leaning back a bit. All right, so we can come back and adjust this if we need to. So that's good enough for now. So now I'm going to take this and make it a, doesn't matter, I'll just make it absolute. Delete this transform, put this on there, and then this gets merged into that, okay? Now before I do this part here, if you look at this piece of footage and this piece of footage, let me close everything so you can see it better. If we look at these two items, the one here that I brought in from Photoshop, this one hasn't been lens corrected yet. It's still on the old lens. So this has to be re-distorted or undistorted. So now that's back to there, so that should be good. Then we have the corner pin on it, so that puts it here. And then I should be able to add a transform in here and scale this up. Yep, there we go. Good. Okay. So now let me look at the merge. And you can see how that picture is like lined up perfectly with the wall. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this transform to make that bigger. I'm going to go to the merge here and just take this mix down. That lets me see through it. Is that shaking? Go back to this. My roto was not shaking. Let's go back to that roto. Well, I guess it was shaking right there at the end. I'll have to correct that. All right, so right there is where we're looking. So now I'm going to take this transform here and just keep playing with it until I get that lined up. That is really distorted though. Why is it so distorted? Corner pin. Let's try putting this on after the corner pin. Nope, it's just going crazy now. I'll play with that and see. What I should be able to do is just crop that area right there, and it should just work perfectly. I have something clicked wrong. All right, well, whatever. I'm not going to hold you guys up because I'm looking at it. All right, so just play with the planar track stuff. Your assignment for this is going to be to add something planar tracked to it I'm even going to say add 3 planar track things to there. So planar track something over here. Let's say you're using this piece of footage over here on this back wall, and then you could even do it like up here or on the floor or something, okay? So anything. Oops. If you have a piece of your artwork, you can throw your piece of artwork there. If you have a sign, you can put a sign right there. Oh, I know what I'm doing wrong. I'm using corner pin. You definitely could use corner pin for this. I would actually want to use something else. That's why it's not working right. There's a object tracker that I would want to use. That would be the correct way to do that one. All right, so ignore that. Okay, so you can add a sign here, whatever it is, anything, okay? You have the other pieces of footage you can also play with. If you use any of the other footages, not that one, same one. Just be aware that you still need to take that lens distortion on there. And some items are not going to track very good. So something like this is not going to track very good because it's glossy. So as the light is kind of shining across it, you may not be able to see a good track with it. So like right here, it looks like a different image to Nuke than it did right there. Because the image is now glossy and not glossy, it's totally different, okay? So I wouldn't track this one. If you want to replace this one, you may have to track this one and slide it over. Again, because they're all on the same plane, you can do stuff like that. You also want to make sure you match the blurriness of it. So just like we did on the still match and just like we did on the 2D tracking, any blurriness that's there, you want to make sure you have. When you're doing your corner pin stuff, there's an option down here in corner pin to add motion blur to your stuff too. So as it is moving across the screen, you do want that motion blur because otherwise you'll have a crystal clear item moving with the rest of it that's blurry or whatever, but you want motion blur on there so that it looks like it's blurring with the rest of it. And then we'll talk about grain and all the other stuff too, but again, it's the same process that we did before. Okay? So start off, do your lens correction, your lens distortion, then do your planar track, and then you can go from there. Cool? Awesome. Just ignore